Welcome to the Sports Medicine Project, everyone. You've got Kelly and Blake here, and we have Kelsey Tobin to join us today. So Kelsey is a dietitian working with Nutrient Nation out in Leeton, which Kelsey's going to tell us all about where exactly that is. And I'm keen to talk about our guts. That sounds
Guts. Gross.
Talk about guts. And a lot about the low FODMAP diet and how you can use that from a gut health point of view or gut management point of view, particularly when we're talking about training and performance and making sure that our tummy feels good throughout races, I guess, is kind of the guts of it.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
No pun intended. So Kelsey, tell us a bit about yourself.
Perfect. Cool. Thanks for the introduction, Kel. So yes, hello everybody. I'm Kelsey. I am an accredited practicing dietitian, qualified sports dietitian, and I'm currently completing my graduate certificate in sport analytics. So that's with the hope of expanding my skill set in endurance sport coaching, but also in dietetics within elite sport. So as Kel mentioned, I currently work at Nutrient Nation. Nutrient Nation was established in 2015 in Newcastle, New South Wales, by my mentor and very good friend, Rebecca Haslam. So she's trusted me in expanding her business now to rural New South Wales. So I currently live in a town about 180 kilometres northwest of Wagga. So I moved here in early 2020. It's been a great place to hide away from the big city during the chaos of the last 2 years. So I moved here from Newcastle, where I was working with Nutrient Nation, but I was also working in a private hospital there and in research at the University of Newcastle. But now purely just in private practice in rural New South Wales. I've developed my online presence in sport dietetics, but also I service my town and the local surrounds, such as Wagga. So I'm the only accredited sports dietitian in about a 300k radius. And everyone seems to play sport around here. So I've really enjoyed developing my sport dietetic career with recreational and pre-elite athletes, both team and individual sports. However, I guess I've got a more particular interest in endurance sports, purely just to my personal endeavors in triathlon and more recently marathon. But I guess in relation to today, my interest in gut function and athletes has purely come from seeing multiple clients unable to finish or significantly impacted by gastrointestinal upset during their day-to-day lives, in training, and during events. So as a result, I completed the Monash University IBS and FODMAP course earlier in the year. So hopefully today I get to tell you listeners a little bit about, how a dietitian can assist in reducing and eliminating gastrointestinal upset in athletes.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Good. It's something that you talk about like every time you're out on a run with people. Like if you're going for a long run with someone, it's rare that there isn't some conversation about our toilet experiences during running. Like it just comes up all the time.
Or it's in people's Strava when they do a race. You'll see feeling great until the 20, and then like had gut issues for 10, and then the last 10 weren't too bad, and you see their splits drop from like 4 minutes to 6 minute per K.
Yeah. Or sometimes you just get the emoji.
Yeah, the emoji is like a really polite way to.
And I'm sure
I
guess you get this in any kind of allied health field. There's all these weird anecdotal stuff that people say to do and to try, and it probably doesn't work. Like, I'm sure you've heard some weird, wonderful things that people have been told to do, and it's like, please don't do that.
Yeah, there's a range of different things, and look, I'm sure we'll explore it in detail today. Like the low FODMAP diet is not always the answer either. There's so many other things out there that you can trial before you even go down that path, because it is quite a restrictive thing to commence with.
Yeah, and on that topic, I mean, what is the FODMAP diet? I've got to admit, this kind of stuff I didn't know anything about until I actually met you, Kelly, because you've had GI issues when I first met you. You don't have them so much anymore, as much, but you definitely did. And I had no idea what the FODMAP diet was. Because where I grew up out in the country, I don't know, maybe people just didn't talk about it, but no one ever had GI issue. I didn't even know IBS was a thing. I don't know, that was just because I had no idea.
Yeah,
but,
I think I went through like a diagnosis of IBS But I think it was just like an underlying issue of redness.
Yeah,
to be
it
honest.
could have been. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, what is the low FODMAP diet?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I guess I'll start with what FODMAP stands for. So it's an acronym for fermentable oligosaccharide, disaccharide, monosaccharide, and polyols. And these are short chain carbohydrates that are poorly digested or not digested at all in our gut. So as a result,
everyone or just certain people?
Yeah, everybody, which is really interesting. So they're actually then sent down to the large intestine and all the colon. And then these are the food for the bacteria here and are fermented. And that fermentation process then starts to produce gas. And that gas can then lead to things like flatulence, bloating, pain, change in bowel symptoms, all those sorts of things. So that's those IBS type symptoms that probably.
So it's the gas that causes it.
Say that again, sorry.
It's the gas that causes the.
So it's the fermentation process releases gas.
Okay, interesting.
And so what's IBS? Let's talk about that a little bit as well.
Yeah, that's probably a good place to start. So essentially IBS, it stands for irritable bowel syndrome, and that's a functional gut disorder. So it's actually meaning that it's not curable, but it can be managed by diet and lifestyle. So it actually affects, interestingly, about 21% of the population. So whether they're diagnosed or not, that's a whole different story. But essentially it's characterized by recurrent abdominal pain for more than 3 months, in addition to either the urge to defecate, also known as need to go to the toilet, change in their stool frequency. So going to the toilet more often or less, so diarrhea or constipation, and then also change in stool consistency. So whether that's being more like pebbly-like, so your type 1 stool, or your type 7, so more like runny type. So hopefully people aren't listening and they're eating their breakfast at this stage, because we talk a little bit about poo.
All types.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that, as I said, I feel like we all talk about it more often than people let on.
That's true.
I'm just thinking about stools. What way have I ever had any issues? And interesting.
What's that called?
Pardon, say that again.
What's the name of that stool chart?
The stool chart.
Yeah, I've seen it. 1 to 7.
1 to 7.
Yeah, 1 to 7. Yeah. So what type 1 is that pebbly type, and then type 7 is more like water, essentially.
Yeah. And obviously different types tell you different things. Do they? Or
yeah, so technically, look, I guess the type 1 is more of those constipation dominant IBS, whereas more of the type 7 is more of that IBS like diarrhea dominant. But then there's also things like IBS mixed, which really those people that get a mixture of symptoms. And then there's also an IBS diagnosis of unclassified. So they meet the criteria, but there's no real definite I guess cause.
Is that with that stool chart, is it is there normal that's across the globe, like normal, or is it just normal based off you as a person? Like, does each person have their own normal? Yeah,
that's a good question. Look, yes, that's why I guess with the diagnostic criteria, there's a change in these symptoms. So if you usually have a pebbly type stool, then sure, that's probably you don't have IBS. You may need to improve the fiber in your diet, because you've got more of those constipation. You're not forming those consistent stools. But it would be dependent, and I'd have to probably assess them properly.
Yeah.
And you said that 21%, is that in the athletic population or the general population?
That's just the general population.
Wow, that's incredible.
Do they that in athletic populations? Is it higher?
I wouldn't know the statistic, to be honest. But you've just said, we're talking about it all the time, and more often than not, people are just not diagnosed or not going to the doctor or seeing a dietitian to, make that clear, definitive diagnosis. And got upset, I guess, down the athletic path. It doesn't mean that you've got IBS if you're needing to, go to run to the toilet. It could be nervous, it could be stress, it could be the type of carbohydrate drink you're having. There's so many different things.
How in our field, we find that like GPs are incredible, super knowledgeable, but when patients present to them, sometimes they're not I guess, entirely knowledgeable on the musculoskeletal system. How do you find people go when they've gone to the GP with stomach upsets? A GP is pretty knowledgeable on this, or they kind of get told, it's this, don't worry about it, go and see a dietitian?
Yeah, so it's really dependent on the GP. Look, from a dietitian point of view, again, depending on my assessment, I wouldn't really commence a low FODMAP diet until the GP's actually diagnosed the person with IBS.
Yeah.
Reason being is that those symptoms that presented, change in bowel habits, the, abdominal pain, all those sorts of things, they can be a symptom for so many other more nastier conditions, such as celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease, bowel cancer, endometriosis, diverticular disease, all these sorts of things. So I guess from a dietitian point of view, it's important that we're involving a GP in the process.
And what's the criteria for, like, what does a GP go through? Is it testing of stool, testing of blood, or is there a criteria that they have to fit with symptoms?
Yeah, so it's called the Rome diagnostic criteria. That's to define IBS, and that's that kind of characterization of the abdominal pain for 3 months. Then plus they also have to have 2 of the symptoms of either an urge to defecate or need to go to the toilet, a change in stool frequency, and a change in stool consistency. So that's kind of their criteria. But then they also, I always also make sure that they get their bloods done, check if they've got celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease. It depends on the doctor, I guess, and what they've also kind of indicated.
Yeah, right. And so then with the FODMAP diet being helpful for managing IBS, is there other groups of people that would benefit from the FODMAP diet?
Yeah. So yes. So the IBS, essentially the low FODMAP diet was created by the Monash University for IBS. Essentially, but as kind of research has developed, we've found that it can be also useful in people that have diagnosed with endometriosis. So there was a study conducted by the Monash team in 2017 where about 160 women, they met the criteria for IBS, and 36% of those people had endometriosis. And we going through the low FODMAP diet, more than 50% of the women experienced improvement in their gut symptoms who had endometriosis versus only 49% of the women with no known endo. So as you can see, we can see that going through those low FODMAP diet, it does help those gut symptoms of the people with endometriosis. Look, it's not going to cure their condition. As I said, that low FODMAP diet is helpful for managing the symptoms, and because in endometriosis they do get some gut upset that does correlate with those IBS symptoms, the low FODMAP diet does help with that.
Does it help with any of their endometriosis symptoms that are outside of the IBS symptoms?
Unfortunately not. So those other symptoms would be things like fertility. So that's kind of directly is not related at all.
How, I can only remember because you did the FODMAP diet for a little bit, hey, how sustainable is, and I'm only reading a book at the moment about diet and nutrition, and they talk about the highs and lows, of anyone dieting. How sustainable is the FODMAP diet?
Well, I guess it's the way that you approach it. It's not designed to be a long-term diet. So how it actually works, there's 3 stages to it. First stage being the elimination phase. So that's probably the strictest time where you're completely ruling out all those, that FODMAPs, all those short chain carbohydrates for a 2 to 4 week period. So that's when, it's going to be really, really strict. But then you start to reintroduce. So then you start to reintroduce that one FODMAP at a time with that low FODMAP diet in the background. And through those, I guess, introduction phase, you're increasing the FODMAP content of each of the foods to find your tolerable level. So eventually then you get to that personalization stage, you can return back to your normal diet where you're just taking out that FODMAP that's really, providing and triggering those symptoms for you. So at the end of the day, you're not on it forever.
Yeah. So how long does each phase go for typically then?
Yeah, so the elimination is about 2 to 4 weeks. So really you want to make sure that you're getting into that reintroduction phase symptom free. So you're ready to start kind of trialing. And then the rest of it's quite individualized. Sometimes the reintroduction phase could, take 4 weeks. Others, it could take 12. It's going to really vary person to person.
And what's the most common trigger generally?
I can't say that there's a real common one. Look, for athletes, I find that it's the fructan. So that's under that oligosaccharide group. Reason being is because athletes consume more carbohydrates purely because their requirements for carbohydrates is higher than others. So as a result, the volume of that FODMAP is going to be higher. So under this group is things like, your wheat bread, your wheat pasta, onion, garlic, dried fruit, that sort of thing. So when athletes are eating lots of those things, then they're more likely to get those symptoms.
And then like gels and like all of the carby like intra-workout drinks and fuel that you need to have, like I imagine that that's all within one of those categories, is it?
Yep, that's a good question. So essentially, with those sorts of drinks and bars and whatnot, they can kind of be categorized in all different ones. So essentially, you should be looking, those drinks are usually excess in the fructose. So you should probably be trying to look for more of those sucrose and maltodextrin based drinks and bars, and avoiding ones that have the polyol. So things like your nuts, dried fruits, things like that.
Yeah, right. And so you've mentioned that the FODMAP diet can be helpful in athletes. Is that something that athletes that get gut upset should be following like all of the time, or is it just like leading into particular events, or how do you typically navigate that?
Yeah, so I guess there's different scenarios, and it purely comes based on my assessment. So before kind of even thinking about the low FODMAP diet, I'd kind of think about the cause of why they're actually getting their gut upset. So is it their meal timing? Is it because they're nervous before a race? Is it because of the fiber content, the fat, their hydration status, all those sorts of things, right? So assessing that first. And then if I deem that the low FODMAP diet is appropriate, it would be, okay, well, when are these people actually getting the symptoms? If it's just like, day-to-day symptoms, it's not even during exercise, I guess you treat it more like similar to a non-athlete that have got IBS, just making, extra consideration that they need to make sure that they're meeting their carbohydrates and energy demands. And because the low FODMAP diet's often quite restrictive of those things, making sure you're finding swaps for those.
Yeah.
I guess with the symptoms when you're racing and training, what I would probably do is go for more like a low FODMAP diet leading into the race. I guess, particularly in endurance events where you're carbohydrate loading, that's really important to make sure you're considering those swaps. So, instead of, breads, for example, you're looking at maybe more going down your rice path, or gluten-free breads and wraps and whatnot.
And then who's involved in this process? Because it's not podiatrists, I'm assuming.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I'm sure you can get involved.
Yeah, advice.
Yeah, so I guess, is the question more directed to athletes, or is it everyone?
Yeah, I guess if we categorize athletes on one side and then general pop on the other side.
Yeah, so again, it would be dependent if they were diagnosed with IBS or not. So if they just came to me and they said, look, I've got this event coming up in 12 weeks, but I'm scared of gastrointestinal upset, I'd be mindful that, they probably don't have IBS because they're not experiencing the symptoms. But because we can see the evidence does show that, during ultra endurance events, a majority of people are going to get gut upset, the low FODMAP diet may be something to try. So really, in that scenario, a dietitian only needs to be involved. Whereas if they were getting the day-to-day symptoms and, they were getting, they had to get that diagnosis of IBS, then a GP would need to be involved in that process too.
So you said that using the low FODMAP diet leading into a race can be helpful. How far in advance should you start to make that transition across to the low FODMAP diet?
Just be a couple of days, wouldn't it? You can fix it.
Look, in some cases, yes, sure. However, like anything, practice. Actually check if it works first. That's, I think, another important thing. You know, make sure if you've got a training session that's more like a race simulation, trial that low FODMAP prior to that, whether that be 48 hours before, or whether that be, you know, just the meal before. It's going to be really dependent on the person.
And because I've heard of advice to minimize high fiber foods leading into events. Is that kind of the same thing?
No, so it's different. Essentially, fiber, yes, it's a carbohydrate, but that's more looking at, I guess, reducing the volume in people's stomachs. So when you're got low fiber food in your diet, it's much easier for your body to pass. Whereas if you've got quite a high fiber diet, you're more likely to it's to bulk up that stool, and essentially it's, you know, you've got more inside you and more to let go, really.
Right.
Right. What would you say, you know, let's say someone listening to this does have GI upset, and, you know, they're worried about a race coming up in, you know, it might be a couple of months, 3-4 months down the track. What would be, I guess, the amount of time that you would catch up with someone, and how would the assessment run, I guess, if they were to, you know, to find you online and try and see if you can help?
Yeah. So ideally, I guess in the lead up to a race, regardless of whether they've got gut upset or not, I would like at least 12 weeks. Usually that's probably the minimum amount. Reason being is because I guess the word practice comes in mind, and, you know, practice makes perfect. And usually what I like to do is make sure that we're training the gut to make sure that we're, you know, able to cope with the increased carbohydrate load, increased fluid intake, all those sorts of things as well. So that's probably the 12-week period. And then depending on the person, I'd go every 2 to 4 weeks. We'd catch back up to increase that tolerance of those foods. Alternatively, we're probably looking at lowering that FODMAP load, whether that be trialing, you know, 48 hours prior into their harder or longer run, or whatever type of exercise they're doing, or is it during swapping the different types of sport beverages, things like that.
And like with the FODMAP diet and exactly what you sort of just said, like practicing leading up to events, would that differ apart from like the energy requirements, I'm assuming, but would it differ between endurance athletes versus, say, like power athletes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's interesting. The research has actually only been done in endurance-based athletes, purely because to actually show the efficacy of a low FODMAP diet, there needs to be damage to the gut to actually show that there's an improvement. And when you're doing more endurance-based activity, you're going for longer, it's harder, the conditions are hotter. That's when that gut lining is going to be damaged. And so that's when you can prove that the low FODMAP diet actually works. Whereas in those more power-based athletes, the, you know, more shorter interval-based, sure, they may be presenting with symptoms, but we can't actually see much and a more significant gut lining damage, if that makes sense. So sure, it may work, and again, on a case by case basis, it could work, but it's more, I guess, the more research is more in that endurance space.
And like in regards to performance as well, I could very easily just like sit down and eat a burger and then go to the gym, but I could not do that and then go for a run. It's like it's different.
Is that something to do with blood? I don't know. No.
I feel like it would just like I'd vomit if I tried to run.
Yeah.
I mean, like I could just do like a squat. Maybe, right?
Yeah, well, I guess it's I guess the reason, the cause of your gut upset, and I guess if it's a mechanical issue, that, you know, the blood flow when you exercise, blood like goes away to your body, blood goes to your working muscles to make sure that you're doing the activity required, and the last thing that blood flows to your gut. So when you're ingesting a heap of food that's high in fat, that's harder to process, it's going to be hard, and you're going to start feeling sick. So that could be definitely an issue there.
How would someone, you know, that maybe they get, you know, we'll say minor, moderate, and severe on the scale of symptoms, someone with minor symptoms or minor GI issues, how would you recommend them to essentially, like, in quotation marks, train their GI system leading into a race? Like if they want to kind of work out what gels work, what gels are good for them, and then eventually if they find the gels that are right, training their body to be able to withstand those gels. Is that right? Is that how it would work?
Yeah. So I guess, yes, definitely the types of gels is important, but I guess the first thing that I look at is the amount of carbohydrates per hour is what I'd want to figure out and train to first. That's the most important thing. So for example, if someone started and they came to me initially and they were only, I was having one gel an hour. So that's, 25 grams an hour and that's it, right? They have the capacity, depending on how long they're going for, they have the capacity to get up to 90 grams per hour. So if we've got that time, that 12-week period, we can train up to that and making sure that they're getting to that point that it's providing them with the performance benefits, but not impacting their gut.
Yeah, I found it was interesting when I did the Gold Coast half. So I trained on 2 gels per hour,
which is a gram per kilo body weight, was it?
That's what I was, something close to that is what I was aiming for. But I struggled in the Gold Coast half just because the intensity was so much higher than my training run. So I like my second gel, I was like, oh, I feel like I'm going to be sick for the next 4K.
When you drop behind me heaps, I smash you.
Whatever. But like, how do you cater for that? Because usually with like long training efforts, it's not always at that really high intensity, or is that just a me problem?
Yeah. I'm sure it's not just you, Kel. Essentially, it's I guess, can you repeat the question, actually? Say that again.
So like, do you have to train to be able to withstand it during different intensities as well as just during
like a long, slow run
session?
Yeah, I guess that comes back to my point of when you're doing longer durations and higher intensity, that actually is what affects the gut lining. So the higher intensity you go, the more damage you're going to do to your gut. And if you haven't practiced that on a damaged gut, essentially, then that's going to cause the issue. Yes. So story, I would say that you should probably consume gels in higher intensity sessions. Yes.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by damaged gut lining?
Yeah, it's not a permanent damage. Put it that way. And look, we don't need to go into too much detail about what it really means. Otherwise, it gets a bit too scientific for the listeners. But essentially, it's just damaging the lining. So it's when it's reducing the blood flow to the gut.
And when you say it's not permanent, so like when you're recovering from your session, that's recovering as well. Is that sort of what you mean?
Yeah, correct. And just making sure, obviously, that comes with appropriate hydration, appropriate electrolytes, appropriate, protein, carbohydrates post-session to optimize that recovery. Not only for your working muscles, but for your gut.
Have you seen people do the FODMAP diet themselves well? Or I couldn't imagine. I'm sure, you're always going to be better having someone else supervising and to bounce off, but have you ever seen it done well before? Not really.
No, I guess, I wouldn't see it because the reason why people come to me is for the guidance, if that makes sense. Yes, I've definitely heard stories, that's for sure. And I guess that now that I think about it, I guess there's probably some scenarios that people have tried and they've failed, so that's why they've come to me. Reason why it is, the low FODMAP diet is just so restrictive. And it's like I said, it's not always the way to cure people's symptoms. There's so many different ways to go about it. But because it's so restrictive in nature, I think that it's got to make sure that it is managed by a dietitian.
Well, is there an alternative? Is there any medication or anything else that the GP recommends, or what's the go there?
Yeah, so there is definitely all sorts of different things. So I guess it comes back to the cause of what's actually causing your gut. But if the low FODMAP diet is not deemed appropriate, so whether that they've got disordered eating habits or an eating disorder, that would definitely be not appropriate, and you'd be going for other alternative methods. But whether they're an athlete and it's just too restrictive for them, regardless, there is other options. So there's like gut directed hypnotherapy, there's like cognitive behavior therapy, there's stress management things, there's probiotics, there's medications, there's all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, cool.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, this is way off topic, and we definitely didn't talk about this in the questions. What's kombucha?
I was hoping for this question.
Yeah, I don't know why. When you mentioned that fermentation before, I was thinking about, because I love kombucha at the moment, and does that have any? I don't even know what I want to know about it. Just what is it really?
Yeah, sure. It's a tasty drink. The reason, look, it's got, I guess, a bit of a hyped up marketing.
Oh yeah, it does. I believe it. Whatever
Excellent. Look,
it
the
does.
placebo effect, Blake. I love it.
Yeah.
I think that essentially it's a tasty drink. It's the reason why it's got its wrap is because it's fermented, and really they say that it's got bacteria to help your microbiome. But at the end of the day, it's not the amount of bacteria that you need. It's everybody's gut microbiome is so different. So it's not going to help everybody. I think that, it's a great alternative to soft drinks and alcoholic beverages. So why not?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not as great for your gut health as everyone sort of alludes to.
Unfortunately not. There's never that one cure for everything. I wish there was.
It tastes good though. It tastes really good.
It does taste good.
I think I've said this before, but I just imagine like your gut as like a kaleidoscope. That's just how I picture it. Just like a kaleidoscope of like different colors and microbes and whatever else in it. And you just want to make it like as colorful as possible.
Yes.
Is that, I don't know if that's just how I picture it. So then like my veggies, I'm like, I'm just adding to my kaleidoscope.
I like that. That's a really nice analogy. I guess, yeah, definitely the more colors, the better. But I think, and I guess that just proves the low FODMAP diet should never be, a permanent thing, because it is so restrictive. You're reducing all those different varieties in your kaleidoscope. And you need to make sure when you're going through that low FODMAP, you've got those alternatives for all the different food groups. So if you're swapping out the fruits, for example, instead of your apples and your pears, you're going for more oranges, grapes, kiwi fruits. If for your vegetables, we're going down more, you're eating more green capsicum, zucchini, potatoes, carrots, all those sorts of things. With your breads, like I mentioned before, more of your gluten-free options, spelt sourdough, rice cakes, and then so on. So make sure you're getting those swaps.
Without guidance from a dietitian, you just wouldn't have an idea of how to swap certain things. So then it would just end up being really restrictive. I can imagine that's where like the slippery slope would sort of go to.
100%, definitely. Particularly for athletes too, because they need to make sure that they've got extra energy and nutrient needs. There is a really great resource though, the Monash University. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, that they've got a really great app, and you can actually use, it's like a traffic light system, and it determines how high or low the FODMAP is in those sorts of foods that you help. So that's definitely a useful tool. And even when I see clients, I advise them to purchase the app to help them in their day-to-day life, because obviously I'm not going to be around every minute of their day when they're consuming food. Yes, we can give them swaps and meal plans and whatnot, but it does get difficult.
And like when you're doing grocery shopping, just being able to have something there and be like, can I have this or not?
100%. But like I said, it's not a permanent thing. So, even if you kind of follow quite a similar pathway for, 2 to 4 weeks, you get a general gist.
Is it pretty successful?
Yeah, definitely. So actually 3 out of 4 people that go through the low FODMAP diet that have been diagnosed with IBS do come out with relief symptoms.
Wow, that's like a total knee replacement statistics.
I don't know, maybe.
That's good. That's really good. You don't ever see that in any life.
What do you think is the 25% that don't have success? Do you think it's a misdiagnosis, or do you think that they need something different, like cognitive behavioral therapy, or there might be something else underlying, like an eating or disordered eating, or what's your experience with that?
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination, and probably compliance to the diet too, I think is a big one, because it's so restrictive. But I think, it could be so many different things. And again, it comes back to the cause. Maybe their diagnosis of IBS is caused by stress. So rather than going through the low FODMAP diet, they just need some stress management strategies. So refer on to a psychologist and be able to help with that to make sure that they're curing their IBS.
Do people get any symptoms going through the FODMAP diet, like anything systemic, just with following something? Again, I know it's only for 2 to 4 weeks, but just because it is something restrictive and they are changing something, do people get any systemic, symptoms?
Systemic as in?
Oh, I guess just any kind of symptoms at all, really. So like
negative side effects.
Yeah, maybe it might be joint aches, they're tired, they're stressed, their training's changed, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess it's their approach to it. If they've done it properly, they shouldn't, and with a dietitian that's done it, like help them properly, it shouldn't cause too many issues.
Yeah.
In saying that though, that FODMAPs is a prebiotic, and essentially what that is, it's food for the good bacteria in our gut. So when you don't have that food available to you, to the good bacteria, the bacteria dies. So it's still a really important thing that we need to have in our diet. So we need to make sure that we're only on there for that 2 to 4 week period.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, because it's almost like I'm relating this to injuries in my head with treating patients. But you know, you could, if someone gets pain with lifting their arm overhead, and you say, okay, well, just don't lift your arm overhead.
Hey, that's my analogy. I told you that one. That is my analogy that I made up, but you fix it off.
Patients get pain with bending over, and they just decide not to bend over, then they're just avoiding something that they probably need to do anyways. So that's probably not really the solution. So I think, you know, knowing that reintroducing those foods at some point is necessary. You can't just avoid it forever.
Yeah,
100%. I totally agree. And actually, it's something that just comes to mind as well that's related to this is FODMAPs is also, particularly in relation to athletes, it actually promotes blood flow to the gut. So you're kind of in a catch-22 here that, you know, if you take out the low FODMAP, the FODMAPs out of your diet, you're reducing the blood flow to the gut. But if you're introducing them, is that you're helping with the blood flow to the gut to help digest those carbohydrates. So you've got to really assess where you want to go with it.
Yeah, interesting.
Is there any harm for people with IBS to just like power through and just deal with it?
Yeah, so unlike, you know, celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease, all those sorts of things, IBS is, you know, it's not damaging your gut. It's just, I guess it's really thinking about, is these symptoms affecting the person's quality of life? And if it is significantly, then it's probably worth making sure that you're dealing with it, because it's probably, you know, affecting other aspects of your life, like your psychology. But if you can push through, then sure. I guess.
Are there any sports nutrition products that are low in FODMAP?
Yes. So obviously not giving a plug to anybody, but things like Winners gels, Cliff Chew Blocks.
I do the Winners.
Awesome.
Which ones are the Winners?
You can just get them from Woolies.
Oh, yeah. They're cheap, and they're usually on special. They are good. The red ones are good.
Disgusting.
Yeah, they are.
But yeah, Cliff Chew Blocks, Tailwind as well. So that's a carbohydrate-based drink that's quite good. But then for more of your whole food options, so people like going down that ultra endurance phase, looking like the Kez's Bicky selection. Some of your Carmen's muesli bars are quite good. All you need to do, particularly with the whole food options, with Monash University, they've got like a little Monash FODMAP sign that's on some of your products. So that can be quite a good little tip for people that are wanting something that's long FODMAP.
Would you say there's much of a difference? I tend to like say for example, the Cliff blocks that you can have, those little lolly blocks, and then the Winners. Typically I feel pretty good after I have them, but the Morton's gels. I always have to go. I either feel sick or I've got to go to the bathroom after, and I just don't have them anymore.
Caffeine, and they're like really a weird texture.
Yeah, the texture's different. Do you know much about the Morton's? Like, what would be the difference there, and why that would be?
Yeah, look,
hard to say.
It's hard, but it's interesting that you say that, because they are marketed as something that's helpful for your gut. Look, I guess the difference between that and say something, I don't know, like a Winners gel. So Morton's made from memory anyway, from the top of my head, is from dextrose. So yeah, I think that would be just purely depending on the individual tolerance to the different types of carbohydrates. The other thing that comes to mind, I know that Morton, depending again on the type of Morton product you're using, is higher in carbohydrates potentially. And if you're not consuming that with water, or you haven't, you know, trialed these things, your carbohydrate tolerance may not be up to that standard yet, because you're used to having those Winners gels, for example, that are a little bit lower in carbohydrates.
And then like there's certain ones that you can have without water, and then there's ones that you're like is recommended to definitely have with water. Is that right?
Yes. So it just depends on the person. That's probably what they say on the back of the packet. At the end of the day, you should be consuming an hourly target of fluid, an hourly target of carbohydrates, and an hourly target of sodium. So it really depends.
What do you recommend for someone? And we'll talk, let's say, half marathon, half Ironman, full Ironman. They I guess what I've been told or what I've heard is to eat or have your gels. Anything under 45 minutes, you probably don't need to have any carbohydrates. And then anything over 45 minutes, you should have it at the 45-minute mark. And then every 30 minutes thereon. Is that roughly what you've heard or different? Or what would you recommend for people doing different?
I thought it was 90 minutes.
Yeah.
90 minutes, is it?
Am I right?
So
Yeah.
under 90 minutes, you don't need carbohydrates, or you?
You do. So that 90-minute mark is when you should start to fuel. However, if you're going for half Ironman or any of those distances that you just said, you're out there for 5 to 12 hours, right? So essentially, you should probably start fueling as early as possible, really, to meet those hourly demands ASAP. So not just start at the 90-minute mark, because that's when your glycogen levels start to deplete. It's kind of getting ahead of time there and starting probably at that 25-35 minutes, and then making sure that you're hitting your target every single hour for that 5 to 12 hours, however long you're out there for.
And is it 1 gram of carbs per body weight per hour? Is that
per kilo body weight?
Is that what I said?
No, you said it completely wrong. No, okay. Per kilo body weight.
So essentially, this kind of comes under the training the gut. Really, it depends on where you're at. So if you came in to me and starting at 30 grams per hour of carbohydrates, then I would be like, right, okay, we've got that scope to get up to, and if you're going and doing a marathon, we've got the scope to get up to the 90 grams per hour. So we'd start to test your tolerance through that process. So it would depend on where you're at. Ideally, with greater than 2.5 hours, you should be getting 90 grams per hour. And once you pass, say that again.
Go.
Once you pass the 90 grams, once you pass the 60 grams per hour, you actually need to change the types of carbohydrates that you're having, because you exhaust one of the carbohydrate pathways.
Oh, good. That's a good little pearl. So
wait, I've got 2 questions on that.
Yeah.
First one is, I just want to ask them both, otherwise I'll forget. First one is, what do you mean by that? And second is this different between males and females?
Yeah, good question. First question, what do I mean by that? Essentially, we have 2 different types of carbohydrate pathways. Essentially, one of them is the SLGT1 transporter, and the other one is the GLUT5. Now, don't worry about those 2 terms. Essentially,
that's how they're both used. 2 pathways, how we both convert them to fuel or convert them to energy.
Correct. Correct. So essentially, first one, once you exhaust that's got a 60-gram tolerance. Once you exhaust that, you then have to move on to the next one, the GLUT5, and you've got like the 30 to 40 grams in there that you can play with. So you need to make sure that you're changing it up or combining them.
So, and what's an example of doing that?
How do you combine them?
So, for example, what's a good example? It would be looking at, so you need to make sure that you're not in excess of like the fructose, really. So what I would say is, looking at like what carbohydrate-based drinks or gels do you guys use?
Tailwind.
Yeah.
And then what was the other one that I used? Just like I bought a packet of it and chucked. It was the Morton. I've just used the Morton like drink version ones. This is on like what I've used before. Otherwise, Winners gels or Cliff gels or Morton gels probably is what I'd use.
So what I would do is just check what type of carbohydrates they use. Firstly, if they're all that's one type of carbohydrate, then you're probably going to run into trouble. So say that they were all glucose based, for example. What I would then do, I need to find other sources here. I need to go and find some sucrose, some fructose or dextrose or something like that you're trying to change.
That's awesome. And is that only after 2.5 hours, you said, roughly?
Yeah. So anything greater than 2.5 hours, you've got up to a 90 grams per hour tolerance. Well, actually, to be honest, some in the Tour de France recently, some people getting up to 120 grams per hour. So again, it comes back to that, train in the gut.
Incredible. So what about a 90-minute half marathon? That's what
I want to know if there's a difference between male and female first.
Oh yeah, that's second part to the question. I'm going to say no. Comes down to training the gut.
Okay.
Sorry,
it would be on a molecular level, I'm sure. But it'd be very hard to explain.
And then the other question that I just quickly had based off that was, would you do that 60-gram one first and then transfer over to the other, or do you do them all at the same time?
Yeah, so I guess a pathway, say a 12-week block, you came to me and you started at 30 gram, then I'd probably go like 40, 45, then I'd go 50, 55, and then I'd go 60, 65. So that would be, and they'd be all the same type of carbohydrate. Then once that pathway is exhausted, I then go, right, we need to get something else in here.
Right.
Cool. And then when you're racing, so should you just have different sources of carbs to start with if you know it's going to be over 2 hours? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So for a 90-minute half marathon, what would your recommendation be? Would someone even need nutrition? Because when we did the Gold Coast, I had like 4 gels, probably too many.
Yeah. Well, it depends what you trained with. But there's different ways that you can go about it. So with 90 minutes, you don't need to go up to the 90 grams per hour. I'd probably maximum go 60. Yeah. But even with some people that haven't even trained their gut as well, you can even get you can rinse your mouth with the carbohydrate-based drink rather than even swallowing it and still get that same, energy effect.
Yeah.
So some people do that. Other people, yes, you can do the carbohydrates. And if you did 4 gels, so what's that? That's 50 grams. Yeah. So that's, okay, good. No, I don't think that's the be and all. When did you start having them, I guess?
At every 5K. Oh no, like 5, 10. No, actually, sorry, I had 3, but I had 4 on me. So it was 5, 10, and then 15.
Yeah. No, I don't think that's a problem at all. Because I would commence, at about that 25. Yeah. As long as you trained your gut doing that.
Yeah, I weigh 160 kilos, so 100. But yeah, cool. So even for a marathon as well, similar. What would you recommend for someone doing a marathon? Because I wouldn't need to do the double because I'd be under 2.5 hours. No, I'm joking. I'm out there for 6 hours. But yeah, what would your recommendation be for someone for a marathon? Again, if they had trained properly prior to the marathon.
Recognize that this is hard to put you on the spot and ask these questions. It's
no, that's okay.
The caveat to all this is to obviously find you online through your Instagram and then book an appointment with you. But you just got to give them a little bit of information, but then not enough that they're like, all right, I actually need to go and see this person. You've got after the 2.5 hours mark, you've got the scope to go up to 90 grams per hour. So that's where I'd start right from the beginning. So I'd start commencing my nutrition plan from about 25 minutes in. So about the 5K mark, again, depending on how fast you're going, but Yeah, great.
Interesting. I'm pumped up. I'm going to smash a few gels tomorrow, I reckon.
Yeah, train that gut.
And another point to make is that it's going to be uncomfortable sometimes during this process. So don't be afraid of the uncomfortable. You do get to the point that it gets better.
Yeah.
Did you get yourself to 90 for your Mara?
No, I didn't, unfortunately. Blake's face, what?
Yeah.
I got to about 60, 65 grams. And I was happy there. In hindsight, as we briefly chatted just before and talked about my marathon and how I bonked at the end. I don't think it's to do with nutrition because it's not like I wasn't able to get the nutrition in. So I think, in hindsight, maybe for my next marathon, I'll give it a whirl and see where I can go. I didn't have much prep time. So potentially I didn't have time to train my gut to that 90 grams tolerance because that's the first time ever I've really, gone over about a 2-hour mark from exercise. So it was new to me.
What are your thoughts on like whole foods as well? I guess probably less so for marathons and half marathons, but if people are doing like a half Ironman or Ironman, are you recommending that they should be trying to consume whole foods, or is it fine to get by on gels and energy drinks and whatnot? Not energy drinks.
Or even like the UTA 100,
Yeah.
50, those kind of races.
Yeah, a bit of a program coming up for UTA, don't you?
I do. That's super exciting. Yeah. So I would probably recommend whole foods. But I think about the strategies around that, making sure you're not having the whole foods on the run, because that's when, mechanically your tummy's up and down quite a lot. You're better off having that either in transition or on the bike, just purely for a mechanical reason. For your ultra endurance, obviously you've got no runs, for example, you got no choice. You have to do it when you run. But I'd practice on what you're having, and I'd be looking at more of those refined types of whole foods. So, your white breads versus your whole grains. What else? Something like, particularly in the UTA 100, people like hot potatoes and soups and stuff like that. And pretzels. That's a really good one. When you get flavor fatigue with all those gels, you just want something salty.
Yeah.
And that's a really good little one to include in people's plans.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. You just get like hungry, like just having gels and water-based stuff. Like,
yeah,
I feel like you'd want to eat something.
Yeah, something volume. But they've got aid stations throughout the whole course through that process as well. So, you've got access to it. And particularly with our 100 as well, you get like a support crew, so they can go and cook you up a spag bowl if you really wanted to, and sit down and have it at that, the 70K mark.
Yeah. So what have you guys got in the works leading up to UTA? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So essentially I'm running a workshop. It actually starts next Tuesday. And really it's preparing the poor old UTA athletes that have been rescheduled so many times to get their nutrition plan sorted. So we've got workshops with the 22, 50 and 100, and really we're just working through their pre-race strategy. So looking at carbohydrate loading, what they should be eating and leading and practicing with hydration, fiber, fat, all those sorts of things. But then we're also creating their race nutrition plan as well. So we've got like a template and looking at like sodium, hydration, all sorts of things, carbohydrates, making sure and choosing their appropriate sports nutrition product, what's at the aid station, all the logistics around what to carry, that sort of stuff.
And where can people go to find really good information about, race nutrition and FODMAP diets and things like that? Is there an Instagram page, or is there anywhere that we can send people?
So I guess for Nutrient Nation, so that's where I work. We've got an awesome Instagram page that we like to post lots of different stuff. We've also got a really great little ebook coming out soon that's on IBS athletes and looking at the FODMAP diet. I'll make sure that I send you guys the link to make sure that all your listeners can sign up for that. So that's getting released, I think, from memory, the 7th of August. So that's super soon, in a week's time. And really the purpose of that ebook is to explain what IBS is, what's causing their symptoms, how to go about managing it, and whether they've been diagnosed or not, it's still going to be a really useful tool to guide them through that process. And if you're wanting more individual advice, you can definitely just book in.
Yes. Is there a link in your Instagram bio? Do people click that and that takes you to book in, or is it through the website? Or
I actually think at the moment it's for the UTA workshop, so that's for that one. But to book an appointment with us, you can just go onto the Nutrient Nation website.
Yeah, sweet.
And you do online consults and everything like that too?
Yeah, so obviously I'm in the country, so
driving back to Newcastle.
Yeah, or come to me. It's nice out here. But yes, I do online consults. But we've also got 3 awesome dietitians in Newcastle as well, Beck, Rachel and Maddie, that they are all on top of everything that I've just spoken about today. So I'm sure they'd be more than happy to assist if you're wanting more of that face-to-face appointment.
Yeah, and it's different, like in physio, podiatry, chiro, osteo world, it's obviously, I think it's more beneficial to have it face-to-face. But with this kind of stuff, you can really get everything you need from having an online consultation. Is that true?
Oh, 100%. That's for sure. I guess it's just how you learn too, isn't it? It's some people just like that face-to-face appointment, others not. I guess it's also if you're wanting something different, if you're wanting a body scan, if you're wanting a a sweat test, the dietitian's going to have to be there. So it depends on what you're after.
Yeah, and that leads me into my very last question. How, and again, very hard to answer, I know, how accurate and would you recommend people to start? I know there's a couple of nutrition companies doing basically it's like a calculator for how much or what they perceive as how much sodium, how much carbohydrate, protein that you should have. And there's also companies doing like a package where you can buy a sweat test kit that gets sent to you. But what are your thoughts on, I guess, someone starting with the calculator and then also on the sweat test that you can buy from them?
I'd probably think about where the client's initial knowledge sits. If they don't really know why they're doing it, then I probably wouldn't advise going down that path. I'd actually make sure that you understand why you're doing it. Why do you need carbohydrates? Why do you need protein? Why do you need fluid? Get that under wrap first. And that's, I'd probably recommend booking a dietitian for that sense, and they can kind of guide you through that process and look at what's the priority for them. Maybe they're already meeting their protein requirements, so they don't need to even worry about that. They need to then go look at their carbohydrate path or their sodium or whatever. So yeah, it's an individualized thing, and make sure that they know actually why they're doing it.
Yeah, awesome.
That's a good answer. People always look for it's almost just like the quick fix, or maybe this will improve everything. So they just look for that sort of easy option. But
yeah.
Sure.
Cool. Yeah, great. Any parting words to leave us with? We've got some absolute pearls out of this one. What do you think? If you could give one bit of advice, what would it be to leave our lovely listeners with, other than obviously booking in to see you? What else could that be?
Don't get caught up in the term gut health. That would be my words of wisdom. Make sure you break down and understand what it is that you're after in terms of, relieving either your gastrointestinal symptoms, or whether it's improving performance, or whether it's getting healthier. Whatever it is, make sure that you know what you're after.
Yeah, such a buzzword at the moment. I like it.
Yeah, and kombucha is not going to be the fix.
No, I'm sorry. Or your Colts either. No.
Your Colts are so gross.
What's Colts?
Colts. I remember we were.
Oh, those little things. Yeah.
We're going to Bali and ate with mum and dad, and they were forcing me to drink these Yakults before we went for I don't know what. Oh, they were so disgusting. Work.
Yeah. Well, placebo effect, I'm sure. For some.
Yeah. So follow your Instagram. Ebook's coming out really soon. And we'll have all that linked in the show notes. People can click, sign up, take you a couple of minutes. And why wouldn't you do it? It'll be incredible. A lot of knowledge in there. And thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been awesome to chat.
Thanks, Kels.
Thank you.